Everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive deep again?
Always.
Okay, great.
Oh,
Today, we're looking at multi-hazard early warning systems.
uh-oh.
Well, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
To break it down. You always hear people asking, how do these things actually work?
And who are they really helping?
Exactly. And what are the biggest challenges they face? So we're going to tackle all those questions today using some really interesting videos.
From where?
So we have a couple from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and then one from the American Geosciences Institute.
Oh, nice. I've seen some of their stuff before. Always super informative.
Yeah, they are. And what's cool about these videos is that they really push past the idea of early warning systems being just,
Like sirens blaring.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh no, there's a tornado coming, run.
Right. It's so much more than that.
Right. It's a whole approach to managing risk, thinking about all kinds of threats.
Not just natural disasters, right?
No, not at all.
The UN video actually talked about, like, hazard clusters. Oh, yeah, I remember that. So it could be, like, a combination of things.
Exactly. Like maybe a hurricane hits, which then triggers a landslide.
Yeah.
And because of the disrupted infrastructure, now you have a disease outbreak.
Wow, yeah. It's all connected. So in the UN video, they lay out this disaster risk management approach, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
With these four main parts they call pillars: risk knowledge, forecasting, warnings, and preparedness. Kind of like the foundational elements.
It makes sense when you think about it. You got to understand the risks first.
Right, like what are the potential hazards? How likely are they? Where are the vulnerable areas?
And then you have to be able to forecast and monitor those hazards.
So know when something's brewing, basically.
Right, like using weather models, sensor networks, all that stuff.
Okay, so you've got the risk knowledge and the forecasting in place, but then what?
Well, that's where the warnings come in. You got to be able to get that information out to the people who need it in a way they understand and in time for them to take action.
Right, because what good is all that knowledge and forecasting if people don't get the message?
Exactly. And then, of course, there's preparedness.
So even if people get the warning, are they ready to act on it? Do they have a plan? Do they have supplies? Do they know what to do?
That's what makes the difference between a near miss and a catastrophe.
Yeah, it's not just about checking boxes on those four pillars.
No, definitely not.
It's got to be more than just having the pieces.
Think of it like building a house.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like you need solid foundations in each of those areas.
Yeah.
Risk knowledge, forecasting, warnings, preparedness. But what if your foundation in risk knowledge is all crumbly? Or the framing of your warning communication is weak?
Oh, I see what you mean. The whole structure becomes unstable.
Exactly. And that's where systemic governance comes in.
Okay, so tell me more about that. What is that?
It's about making sure all those parts are strong and connected and working together like seamlessly.
So it's about the integration, not just the individual elements.
Yeah. You could have like the most amazing forecasting technology in the world, right? But if the warning doesn't reach the right people, or they don't trust it, or they don't understand it,
Then the system fails.
totally. It's all about making sure everything works together effectively.
That makes sense. And that actually connects to something that that really jumped out at me from the UN video.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Only 37% of the countries in the Americas have multi-hazard early warning systems in place.
Wow. Really? Only 37%?
Yeah, that's the lowest of any region globally. Makes you wonder, are we missing something here?
That's a pretty stark statistic. Like, it makes you think, are we really as prepared as we think we are? Especially here in the Americas.
Yeah, it's a bit concerning. Why is that?
Well, it's hard to say for sure. Could be a few things, right?
Like what?
I mean, it's possible that there's some underreporting going on.
Yeah, maybe some countries have systems, but they're not, like, officially recognized or documented.
Right, exactly.
But even if that's the case, it still points to a potential gap.
Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement. But the bigger question is, what's contributing to this disparity? Like, is it a lack of resources?
Yeah.
Or maybe political will? Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, maybe a lack of inclusivity, like in how these systems are designed and implemented.
Oh, that's a great point. And speaking of inclusivity, the UN video really hammered home the idea that early warning systems are a right, not a privilege.
Yeah, they even quoted the UN Deputy Secretary General in that. Everyone should be protected by an effective multi-hazard early warning system.
Powerful statement, especially when you consider who might be getting left behind, right?
Right. And the video specifically mentioned several groups, like women, older persons, people with disabilities, those in rural areas, and people experiencing poverty.
So obviously everyone should be included, but why are these groups sometimes overlooked? What are the barriers?
Well, sometimes it's about like ingrained societal inequalities
Yeah.
or assumptions about who is vulnerable and how to reach them.
Like just assuming everyone has access to the same resources and information?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's this example in the video about how a lot of systems just assume that all deaf people know sign language.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I see how assumptions like that could easily lead to exclusion. And when we're talking about a system that's supposed to save lives, that's a huge problem.
Absolutely. So the big question is, how do we bridge these gaps and make sure these systems truly reach everyone?
Yeah, how do we make them truly inclusive?
Well, both the UN and Geoscience Australia videos talk about using a combination of technology and community engagement.
Okay, so let's start with the tech side. What kind of technology are we talking about?
Well, they mentioned things like offline apps.
For areas with limited internet access
Exactly.
and redundant communication systems, like satellites.
Yeah, so if a hurricane knocks out power and internet, people in remote areas can still get warnings.
So it's about having backup plans, multiple ways to get the information through.
Right, because relying on just one system can be risky, especially during a disaster.
Makes sense. But technology's not a cure-all, is it?
No, definitely not. You can't just assume everyone has a smartphone and knows how to download and use an app.
Or that they can even afford those things in the first place.
Right. We have to think beyond the tech itself and consider who's being excluded.
Okay, so if technology alone isn't enough, what about community engagement? What does that look like in practice?
So it's about building trust, really understanding the specific needs of a community, and then developing solutions that make sense for them. Solutions that are culturally relevant and appropriate.
I like that. It's about making sure the system fits the people, not the other way around. But one thing that really stuck with me from the UN video was that question of building trust with people who might be skeptical of governments.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially if they've been let down by systems in the past.
Right, like promises were made but not kept.
Exactly. Why would they trust the next warning that comes along?
It's like any relationship, trust has to be earned.
Exactly. You have to show them that the system works, that the information is reliable, and that past interventions have been successful.
It's about proving yourself trustworthy through actions, not just words.
Exactly. Building that kind of trust, it takes time and consistent effort.
And demonstrable results. Okay, so we've talked about the UN videos. What about that Geoscience Australia video? How does that fit in?
Well, that one focuses on Australia's approach to disaster preparedness, which is actually pretty advanced.
Interesting. So what can we learn from them?
Well, even though they have different hazards to deal with down there, the challenges they highlight, they're pretty universal.
Like what?
Like understanding risk, communicating effectively, engaging communities, and making sure everyone has access. These are all global concerns.
So even though the specific hazards might be different, the underlying principles of a good early warning system, they're kind of the same everywhere.
Exactly. And to address these challenges, Australia has developed some pretty innovative tools.
Oh, like what?
They mentioned this thing called Jesus, which helps assess potential losses from natural hazards.
Interesting.
And then there's Sarah, which analyzes how resilient infrastructure systems are.
So like how well they can withstand a disaster.
Exactly. And then they have this geospatial delivery platform that makes all this data and information easily accessible.
So anyone can use it.
Yeah, which is huge because it means that people can actually make informed decisions based on real data.
That's amazing. It sounds like they're really using technology to not only predict and warn about hazards, but also to understand those underlying vulnerabilities, like what makes communities more susceptible to those hazards in the first place.
Exactly. It's not just about reacting. It's about being proactive.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, huh? From the core components of these systems to the importance of inclusivity and community engagement, and even a glimpse into Australia's approach.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is. But I think it's clear that effective early warning systems, they're not just about technology or data, they're about people.
And partnerships. And working together to create a safer future for everyone.
That's a great point. It's a collective effort. All right, well, we've got plenty more to discuss, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back to dive even deeper into this fascinating topic. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're ready for more, because we're about to get into some really interesting examples and strategies for making these early warning systems actually work.
Yeah, in part one, we kind of laid out the groundwork, the main components, the challenges.
Right, like inclusivity, community engagement.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, one thing that really struck me from the UN videos was the emphasis on community-based approaches.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It's interesting because you might think early warning systems are all about like high-tech gadgets and fancy algorithms.
Right, but these videos really highlighted the power of grassroots efforts.
Like involving the community from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about it. Communities are usually the first ones to feel the impacts of a hazard.
Right, they're on the front lines.
And they have this incredible wealth of local knowledge that can really inform how these systems are designed and implemented.
It's like tapping into a resource that's already there.
Exactly. Instead
Yeah.
of relying solely on outside experts, they're taking ownership of their own safety.
Empowering communities to be their own first line of defense. I love that.
And there were some great examples in the UN video.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
Well, they interviewed this woman, Michelle Forbes, who heads the National Emergency Management Organization in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Okay, so she's dealing with some pretty serious hazards, I imagine.
Yeah, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, the whole works. And she talked about how they use really simple community-based measures to monitor flood levels.
Like what? Rain gauges?
Yeah, things like that. And they also have these volunteer networks who go out and check river levels and report back.
So they're actively involved in gathering information.
Exactly. And then she talked about their citizen science approach to volcanic hazards, which was super interesting.
Citizen science, so they're getting the community involved in the actual scientific monitoring.
Yeah. They have people trained to observe and report on things like gas emissions, ground deformation, all that stuff.
Wow, so they're basically like citizen volcanologists.
Pretty much. And Forbes said this played a huge role in evacuating people during the 2021 eruption.
So it really made a difference.
Definitely. They were able to get a lot of people to safety because of those early warnings and the community's involvement.
That's amazing. It shows that effective early warning doesn't always require some crazy, expensive technology. It can be grounded in local knowledge and community participation.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really important point: culturally appropriate communication. The UN video emphasized that just translating warnings into different languages isn't enough.
Right, you have to make sure the message actually resonates with the community's culture and values.
Yeah, otherwise they might not understand it. Or even worse, they might ignore it.
It's like speaking a different language altogether, even if the words are technically correct.
Exactly. And that's where those assumptions we talked about earlier can be really dangerous.
Like assuming all deaf people know sign language.
Yeah, that's a classic example of a well-intentioned message missing the mark because of cultural misunderstandings.
Michelle Forbes brought up another great example. She said that even something as simple as using pictures and warnings can be really important for reaching people who might not be literate or have limited access to technology.
Oh, that's a good point. It's about meeting people where they are and tailoring the communication to their needs.
Exactly.
It's about finding multiple ways to get the message across and making sure everyone has the information they need to take action. And recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to communication.
Right. What works in one community might not work in another. Okay, so community-based approaches are essential, but what about technology? Does it have a role to play?
Absolutely. Technology can definitely help bridge gaps and expand the reach of these systems. It's about finding the right balance between high-tech and high-touch solutions.
I like that. So what kind of tech are we talking about here?
Well, in the UN video, Carlos Vigimal from OTT Hydromet talked about using redundant communication systems, like satellites.
To reach people in remote areas where traditional communication infrastructure might not be reliable.
Exactly. Especially during a disaster when cell towers might be down or the internet's out.
It's like having a backup plan for your backup plan.
Exactly. And he also talked about how technology can make these systems more user-friendly. Like, think about offline apps that provide critical information even when you don't have internet access.
Oh, that's a great idea, especially for communities that might not have consistent connectivity.
Right. It puts the power of information directly in people's hands.
No matter where they are or what their tech resources are. Okay, and then there was the Geoscience Australia video. They highlighted some pretty impressive tools, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah. They're doing some really cool stuff down there. We talked about Jesus, which is used for assessing potential losses from natural hazards.
Right, and then there's Sarah, which analyzes the resilience of infrastructure systems.
And their geospatial delivery platform, which makes all this data and information available to anyone who needs it.
So they're not just keeping it to themselves, they're sharing it with the world.
Exactly. It's all about collaboration and transparency.
So it seems like technology can be a powerful tool for understanding risks, planning mitigation efforts, and ultimately protecting lives and property.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool.
It's not a silver bullet.
Right. It
Mm.
can't replace human expertise or community knowledge. It should complement and enhance those things.
So it's not about choosing technology over community engagement or vice versa. It's about making sure they work together.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about community-based approaches, we've talked about technology, but there's one more crucial element that we need to discuss.
And that is,
Trust. Building trust with at-risk populations who might be skeptical of governments or even aid organizations.
yeah, that came up a lot in the UN video. It's a tough question. How do you gain the trust of people who've been let down in the past?
Right. Like if the government has made promises and not kept them, or if aid hasn't reached the people who needed it most.
Why would they believe the next warning that comes along?
Exactly. So in the video, they interviewed Lisa Hernandez from the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction.
Okay, what does she have to say?
Well, she really emphasized the importance of consistent engagement with communities, not just during a crisis, but all the time.
So it's about building relationships, being present in the community, showing that you care.
Yeah, and demonstrating transparency, being open about the risks, the plans, the decision-making processes, and proving that the system actually works.
Show them that you're reliable, that you're there for them.
Exactly. And both Lisa and Carlos Villamil stressed the importance of past successes. If communities have seen firsthand that the government and aid organizations have responded effectively to past disasters, they're more likely to trust their warnings in the future.
It's like building a track record of success. Actions speak louder than words, right?
Right. So building trust takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a commitment to open communication.
And it has to be a two-way street. Communities need to be involved in the design and implementation of these systems from the very beginning, not just treated as passive recipients of information.
I agree, they need to have a voice. So to sum it all up, successful early warning systems, they're multifaceted.
They require a holistic approach.
Exactly. We need community-based approaches, we need technology, and we need trust.
And we can't forget about culturally appropriate communication, making sure the message reaches everyone who needs to hear it in a way they understand and trust.
Absolutely, it's all connected. So what are your main takeaways so far from this deep dive? What's standing out to you?
Well, for me, it's that constant interplay between the human element and technological advancements.
Oh yeah, finding that sweet spot where innovation actually empowers communities and builds trust.
Exactly. It's not about choosing technology over community engagement or vice versa. It's about making sure they work together.
I like that. It's not an either-or situation. It's about finding the right balance, making sure technology serves humanity.
Exactly. And not the other way around.
Well said. So as we head into the final part of our deep dive, I think it's time to zoom out a bit.
Okay. Where are we headed?
Let's look at the bigger picture. How do these early warning systems fit into the broader context of disaster risk reduction and sustainable development? What are the long-term goals we're aiming for? We'll tackle all that and more in part 3. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've made it to the final part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we really have.
We've talked about the different components of early warning systems, the importance of inclusivity and community engagement.
We even took a little trip down under.
To Australia, yeah.
Yeah.
To see what they're doing. But now it's time to, I don't know, kind of like zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, step back.
Look at the bigger picture, you know?
So at strategic level.
Exactly. We've talked about how to build these systems, but why are we building them in the first place?
Right. What's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, what are we trying to achieve here? And I think the videos definitely give us some answers to that. The UN video especially really stresses that early warning systems aren't just about reacting to disasters, they're about preventing them.
Yeah, it's a totally different mindset, right?
Right. It's proactive, not reactive.
It's about recognizing that disasters aren't just inevitable acts of nature.
That we can actually do something to prevent them.
Exactly. They happen because of, like, this complex mix of hazards, vulnerabilities, and lack of preparedness.
So it's not just about dealing with the symptoms, it's about addressing the underlying causes of risk.
Yeah, like getting to the root of the problem.
Building a world where disasters don't have to happen.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. It's a bold vision.
It is, but I think it's achievable. And early warning systems are a huge part of that.
Because they give people the information and the time to take action.
Exactly. To reduce the impact of a hazard or even avoid it altogether.
Like knowing a storm is coming and having time to, I don't know, board up your windows, secure loose objects.
Evacuate if you need to.
Yeah, those actions can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And that's why the UN is pushing for universal coverage of multi-hazard early warning systems by 2027.
Wow, so everyone in the world would be covered.
That's the goal. It's ambitious, but I think it's worth striving for. It has the potential to save so many lives.
And build more resilient communities.
Exactly.
But that's a huge undertaking. It's going to require a lot of cooperation and investment, and we have to make sure no one is left behind.
Couldn't agree more. And this actually leads to another really important point that the UN video brought up, which is the link between early warning systems and sustainable development.
Oh, right. I remember that.
So they were saying that these systems can actually help us achieve the sustainable development goals, especially those related to poverty reduction, climate action, and obviously disaster risk reduction.
It's all connected, isn't it? It's like by investing in early warning systems, we're not just reducing the impact of disasters, we're actually laying the groundwork for a more sustainable and equitable future.
I love that. A ripple effect.
Yeah, so it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.
Thriving in the face of challenges. That's the ultimate goal.
Well said. So I think we've come to the end of our deep dive. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of complex stuff, but I think the main takeaway for me is that early warning systems, they're not just about technology or data, they're about people.
About partnerships, about working together to protect lives and livelihoods, and about creating a safer future for everyone. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Imagine you were tasked with designing an early warning system for your own community. What would be the most important things to consider?
What would you prioritize?
How would you make sure it's inclusive, effective, and really builds trust?
It's a tough challenge, but it's one worth tackling.
It is. And hopefully this deep dive has given everyone some food for thought.
Some inspiration to get involved.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a great conversation.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and